You know that trope, right? The student at the chalkboard effortlessly solving some impossible equation in 5 minutes while everyone else just stares in total awe.
Oh yeah, the classic cinematic genius moment.
Mhm.
Goodwill Hunting style.
Exactly. I mean, we are so conditioned by movies and pop culture to believe that at the absolute highest levels of academia, it's just raw, innate intellect that gets you there. Like, that is the only ticket to the top.
Right, but it's really not.
No, it isn't. And today, we're actually looking at a custom-tailored deep dive based on a fascinating blueprint from Dr. Arup Giri. And it proves that this whole effortless genius thing is actually the fastest way to totally wash out of a PhD program.
It really shatters that whole illusion entirely. I mean, relying on quick thinking alone in an environment that is dedicated to uncharted research, it's actually a surprisingly reliable recipe for failure.
Which is exactly why this deep dive exists.
Yes.
We are deconstructing the actual, emotional resilience and the structural habits required for extreme intellectual endurance.
Because it is definitely an endurance sport.
Oh, for sure. So whether you are currently navigating graduate school, or maybe you're contemplating a massive research project, or honestly, even if you just want to understand how top-tier thinkers tackle impossible problems in the corporate world, this deep dive is going to hand you their exact playbook.
It's a playbook that, frankly, a lot of people wish they had on day one.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because the idea that deep research requires sheer, untouchable genius is arguably the most ruinous myth out there. Think of your standard education, like undergrad or high school, as driving a sports car really fast on a beautifully paved road.
Smooth, predictable, clear directions.
Exactly. If you're a quick thinker, you navigate the curves, you ace the tests, you get straight A's. But a PhD is like having to pave a brand new road in the pitch dark while you are currently driving a tractor on it.
That is quite the image.
Right, but you are building something that absolutely no one has ever built before, so those quick thinkers in their sports cars, they just spin their wheels in the mud when the pavement ends.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't just some anecdotal observation. The source material we're analyzing isn't just one person's opinion. It is a meticulously compiled blueprint.
Yeah, drawing on some serious data.
Exactly. It draws on academic studies, expert faculty advice, real-world supervisor insights. And across the board, the data proves that pushing the boundary of human knowledge is a grueling long-distance marathon.
And decidedly not a sprint.
Right. It is not designed for the swiftest mind, mainly because those super swift minds have usually never really had to struggle.
Yeah, they've never hit a real wall before. So if raw intellect isn't the engine that paves that road in the dark, we have to look at what actually keeps the tractor moving. And the source leans heavily on a framework from computer science professor Matt Might.
Oh, the triad of traits.
Yes, he argues that escaping a PhD with your sanity basically hinges on this specific triad: perseverance, tenacity, and cogency.
Which makes sense, because finding the boundary of human knowledge, which is what you do by reading papers and taking advanced classes, that's actually the easy part.
Which sounds crazy to say, but yeah.
It's true, though. The real battle begins when you step beyond that boundary into the unknown, right? To solve an open, entirely unsolved problem.
No more syllabus.
Exactly. There's no syllabus. There's no test to cram for. There's literally no set procedure. You shift from being a consumer of knowledge to a creator of knowledge, and the shock of that transition is just profound.
And that structural void is exactly what creates the infamous 2 to 3 year wall. The source notes this massive peak in attrition that hits students like a freight train about halfway through their programs.
The dropout rate there is wild.
It really is, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, a PhD is essentially a cure for the ego with a vengeance.
Oh, I love that phrasing. A cure for the ego with a vengeance.
Right. Because if you are used to being the smartest person in the room, the one who always gets things right on the first try, the daily reality of a lab will totally break you. To persevere, you have to develop the psychological stamina to look at a failed experiment, completely detach your self-worth from that failure, and just immediately start troubleshooting other plausible solutions.
And that's where the second trait comes in. Perseverance keeps you standing after a brutal failure, but tenacity is what you actually need to carve out a path forward.
Because you can't just keep failing the exact same way.
Exactly. Tenacity means weaving several isolated problems and solutions into a really clear, compelling research arc. It is the proactive side of the coin. Tenacious scholars aren't just hiding in a basement lab somewhere.
They're out there talking to people.
Right, they are forging relationships with other researchers, ensuring people know who they are and why their specific maybe obscure problem actually matters to the broader world,
Hmm.
which is absolutely crucial for surviving the brutal job market after you graduate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that brings us to the third trait in the triad, which is cogency. Now, we tend to think of science as purely an act of discovery, right? Like, you find the truth, you write it down, and the truth just speaks for itself.
In a perfect world, Maisie.
Yeah, but the source material really emphasizes that science is just as much an act of persuasion.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, you could have the most revolutionary, world-changing idea in human history, but if you present it poorly, it just dies on the vine. Cogency is the ability to articulate your ideas simply, clearly, and forcefully.
Professor Might uses a very specific phrase for this,
Yeah, he calls it spoon-feeding the experts.
which, I'll be honest, it sounds a bit condescending at first glance, right? Spoon-feeding a world-renowned expert. But when you look at the mechanics of it, it's really an exercise in radical empathy.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about minimizing the cognitive pain for your reader so they can just instantly grasp your contribution rather than having to fight their way through this thicket of convoluted jargon.
And to build that kind of empathy, Professor Might's advice is highly specific. He actually recommends that PhD students start a blog.
Which seems wild, like they don't have enough to do.
Right. But it's not to become influencers or to chase clicks. It's simply to practice the mechanics of writing for a general audience. Achieving true cogency requires thousands of hours of conscious, deliberate practice.
Yeah, just forcing yourself to translate complex neural networks or whatever into digestible, logical steps.
Exactly.
So Matt Might's triad perseverance, tenacity, cogency, that gives us a fantastic philosophical baseline. But, philosophy only gets us so far. Let's look
Yeah.
at the hard empirical data. Professor Henrik Toft Sørensen from Aarhus University, he supervised over 60 doctoral students over a period of decades.
That is a massive sample size.
It really is. And from that, he mapped out the core predictors of a highly successful outcome, which he cleverly labeled the I determinants.
Right, the I determinants. So Sørensen's list starts with interest, meaning a deep, genuine curiosity about the study area. Then there's incentive, which is a strong internal professional drive.
Like, you have to actually want it for yourself.
Exactly. Then, idea, representing a crystal clear vision of the investigation. Initiative, which is that proactive troubleshooter mindset where you definitely do not wait around for instruction.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that one later.
For sure. Then there's integrity, maintaining the highest ethical standards. And finally, interpersonal relationships, which means actively building collaborative ties.
I have to push back on one of those, though.
Okay, which one?
Integrity, because we see headlines literally all the time about forged data or, manipulated images in top-tier medical journals, high-level research fraud. So is integrity truly a survival trait? Or is it just something academia wishes was a survival trait? Because honestly, it seems like a lot of people cut corners and get away with it.
It is a totally fair critique, especially given the news lately. But if we look at the actual mechanics of a multi-year research arc, faking data creates this immense, totally overwhelming cognitive burden.
Oh, because you have to keep track of the lies.
Yes. When you build a house of cards, you spend the rest of your career terrified of peer review, of replication studies, even of your own colleagues. It completely destroys that interpersonal pillar Sørensen mentioned, because you constantly have to guard your work from deep scrutiny.
You can't let anyone look too closely.
Right. So while a lack of integrity might get you a quick publication today, it almost always leads to spectacular burnout or public disgrace over a decades-long career. Genuine integrity just removes that psychological tax entirely, allowing the scholar to focus 100% on the unknown.
Okay, that cognitive burden aspect makes total sense. Like, you can't pave a road in the dark if you're constantly looking over your shoulder to see if someone noticed you used fake asphalt. And, Sørensen's individual observations, they mirror the macro data perfectly. Let's layer in this landmark review by Anna Sverdlik, published in the International Journal of Doctoral Studies. Her team analyzed over 160 empirical studies on the doctoral experience.
That is huge.
Yeah, and they divided the success factors into two buckets, internal and external.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Sverdlik's findings on the internal side really prove that intrinsic motivation just completely eclipses external rewards.
Like prestige or money.
Right. If a candidate is pursuing a doctorate for a fancy title, or parental approval, or just a future pay bump, those external motivations lose all their power at like 2:00 a.m. in a freezing lab, when your experiment fails for the fourth time in a row.
A title won't keep you warm at 2 a.m.
It really won't. Intrinsic motivation, just doing the work for the sheer passion of solving the puzzle, that is the only fuel that burns long enough to actually get you through that 2 to 3 year wall.
And I want to point out, those internal self-regulatory strategies, they are entirely relevant for you, the listener, regardless of your field. Sverdlik's study highlights rigid time management, overcoming perfectionism paralysis, and actively managing imposter syndrome.
Which are universal struggles.
Absolutely. Those aren't just academic skills. If you are coding a new app, if you're writing a novel or leading a massive corporate restructuring, you are doing deep knowledge work. You have to manage your own psychology and regulate your internal narrative way before you can actually manage the project.
That is so true. And then moving to the external side, Sverdlik's research provides a really fantastic counterintuitive insight.
Oh yeah, I love this part.
We always assume the most successful researchers are the ones who never leave the lab, right? But her data shows that success requires quality supervisor support, active socialization, and crucially, a rigid work-life balance.
Which feels completely backward to the whole modern hustle culture narrative, like you're supposed to grind 24/7.
It does feel backward, but neurologically speaking, it is absolutely essential. Forcing time away from the lab actually engages what neuroscientists call the default mode network.
Oh, right, when you're resting.
Yeah, when you step away to take a hike or cook dinner or socialize, your subconscious finally has the available bandwidth to process those complex, sticky problems. A rigid work-life balance doesn't detract from the research. It actually accelerates it by breaking the cycle of perfectionism and tunnel vision.
So we have the philosophical triad from Matt Might, and we have the empirical backing of 160 studies from Sverdlik. But how does a student actually synthesize all this on just a random Tuesday? Like, what does this actually look like?
Boots on the ground.
Exactly. And the source provides this mind-blowing case study. Dr. Saurabh Sharma, a pain scientist, his PhD thesis didn't just win a bunch of awards, it yielded an astronomical 26 peer-reviewed publications.
Which is just insane, considering most students are thrilled to just get 2 or 3 out of a thesis.
Wait, so how did he do it?
Well, Dr. Sharma's output is staggering, but it came from a blend of really meticulous project management and some highly unconventional tactics. He didn't just show up on day one hoping for inspiration to strike.
Definitely not.
No, he arrived with a highly detailed 3-year work plan. He mapped every single project onto a weekly timetable, and he knew his exact final submission deadline before he had even officially enrolled in the program.
See, that level of militant planning is super intimidating, but I guess it acts as a really powerful commitment device. It completely removes the daily friction of deciding what to do when you wake up.
It definitely takes the guesswork out of Tuesday morning.
But the part of his strategy that genuinely threw me for a loop was his reading by writing method. The source notes that he advises students to stop reading the literature and just start writing.
Yep, just start.
But wait, doesn't writing before you actually finish reading feel like putting the cart before the horse? Like, how can you possibly write a scientific paper about a topic you haven't finished researching yet?
I know, it sounds like a recipe for a terrible uninformed paper. But remember how Sverdlik's research touched on perfectionism paralysis?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Dr. Sharma's method is the ultimate antidote to that. The big trap of academia is the infinite library. Students feel like they never know quite enough to actually start typing, so they enter this endless consumption loop, just reading hundreds of papers to quell their own anxiety.
Just constantly preparing to start.
Exactly. Dr. Sharma breaks that loop with what he calls the X strategy.
Wait, I think I see where this is going. If he starts writing immediately, he is inevitably going to hit a wall where he doesn't know a fact or a date or a mechanism, right?
Precisely.
So by dropping a placeholder in the text, like a row of X's and just continuing to write, he's basically using his own rough draft as a diagnostic tool for his ignorance.
That is the exact mechanism. You aren't paralyzed by the infinite amount of literature out there anymore. You have this really messy draft filled with X's, and now you can execute highly targeted surgical reading.
You're just hunting for the missing pieces.
Right. You go to the library hunting for the exact piece of data that replaces the X in paragraph 3, rather than just aimlessly wandering through journals hoping for inspiration to strike. It turns writing from a final performance into a really active daily learning tool.
It completely flips the workflow. It's brilliant. And speaking of writing, Dr. Sharma also engaged in really ruthless critical appraisal. He actively reviewed papers for reputable journals while he was still just a student.
Which is a great way to learn what not to do.
Totally. Exposing himself to other people's bad drafts really honed his ability to critique his own work without all that ego getting in the way. He also forced himself to speak to lay audiences. I mean, if you can distill complex neurological pain science down to its core for someone with zero scientific background, you have definitely achieved Matt Might's standard of cogency.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Sharma also brings up a really profound social component. Utilizing this brilliant marriage analogy, he explicitly warns against pursuing a PhD just because your peers are doing it.
Because just like a marriage of convenience, when the honeymoon phase ends, the superficial reasons for being there just totally evaporate.
Yeah, they do not hold up.
When you hit that 2-year wall of tedious data entry and just constant failure, external pressure won't keep you at the bench.
The commitment has to be intrinsic. Furthermore, he emphasizes that truly outstanding scholars actively build a reciprocal culture in their departments.
They don't just hide their secrets.
Right. They don't hoard their knowledge. They take time to help their peers clear their desks. They edit each other's work. They troubleshoot together. They basically build a community of resilience.
It's really interesting that Dr. Sharma was so obsessed with structural clarity and sparing the reader's cognitive load, because that habit actually solves the #1 complaint of the people who are grading these papers. Let's flip the camera around for a second and look at the gatekeepers, the PhD advisors. What actually separates an extraordinary student from a mediocre one in the eyes of the boss?
Well, advisors are, generally speaking, perpetually overwhelmed. They're managing grants, teaching classes, running labs. So #1 on their wish list is a student with a robust troubleshooter mindset. The source actually outlines a golden rule for managing up. If you hit a technical bottleneck, never, ever show up to your advisor's office with a blank stare asking what to do next.
So, what does this all mean in practice? It basically means transferring solutions, not anxiety. For anyone listening who works in a corporate setting, this is the exact same dynamic as handing a really messy deck or a half-finished project to your manager. The golden rule is to always bring a list of what you have already tried.
Yes, show your work.
Even if all 5 of your attempts failed spectacularly, it proves you took the initiative. You aren't asking the advisor to do the mental heavy lifting, you're just asking them to evaluate your troubleshooting process.
And it's the ultimate display of respect for their time. And that respect really must extend to formatting and receiving feedback as well. Outstanding students treat red ink as a tool for growth, not a personal attack on their intelligence.
Which goes back to the ego thing.
Exactly. And from a purely practical standpoint, there is honestly nothing an advisor hates more than having to make the exact same structural edit on a document twice. Handing in a half-baked draft filled with typos or missing citations is just a fast track to losing their respect entirely.
Now, a detail about academic networking really caught my attention here. We're always told to network up, right? Like, try to impress the famous senior professors, the directors, the VPs. But according to the source, the truly outstanding scholars actually prioritize horizontal networking.
They do. They focus their social energy on building genuine, deep bonds with their peer trainees rather than constantly trying to catch the eye of the department head.
Which is such a brilliant long-term play if you think about it. You really have to reject that hyper-competitive, me-first attitude where you view your lab mates as rivals for the professor's attention. Because those peers, they are the people you are going to be writing grants with, co-authoring papers with, and collaborating with for the next 30 years.
Yeah, the famous senior professor is probably going to retire in 5 years. Your peers are your future ecosystem.
Exactly.
And part of sustaining that ecosystem, and honestly, sustaining your own sanity, brings us back to setting boundaries. It shocks a lot of hyper-ambitious students, but great advisors actually prefer candidates who maintain strict personal and professional boundaries.
See, you would naturally assume they want the workaholic, right? The one who sleeps under the lab desk and puts in 100-hour weeks.
Well, a mediocre, short-sighted advisor might exploit that kind of behavior. But a truly great advisor knows that doctoral research is a marathon. Scholars who set clear boundaries are forced to structure their time much more efficiently when they're actually sitting at their desks.
Because they know they have a hard stop at 6 p.m.
Right. They deliver consistent work while protecting themselves from the devastating career-ending burnout that frankly takes so many promising candidates out of the race entirely. In this context, boundaries are not a sign of weakness or a lack of dedication. They are a highly calculated strategy for endurance.
Wow. Okay, bringing all of this together for you, the listener. What we've discovered today completely dismantles the myth of the effortless genius. Becoming an outstanding scholar, or honestly an outstanding thinker in any complex field, isn't about being born with a mystical, untouchable intellect.
It's really not.
It is a highly intentional, practiced combination of skills. It is about structured project management, using tools like the X strategy to diagnose your own blind spots. It's about protecting your mental well-being and actively leveraging the default mode network to solve problems. It's about refining your communication to reduce the cognitive load on your reader. And perhaps most importantly, is about bringing a resilient troubleshooter mindset to the table every single day, knowing you will fail and choosing to build the road in the dark anyway.
This raises an important question. If the absolute highest levels of academic research rely less on raw, innate intelligence and much more on emotional resilience, vulnerability like exposing the exact gaps in your knowledge with those X's and building horizontal communities, how might we rethink the way we identify and promote talent in our own workplaces and schools?
Oh, that's a great point.
Are we accidentally filtering out the marathon runners because we've built systems that only reward the sprinters?
That is a deeply fascinating lens to view our own teams through, whether you are paving a road in academia or building something entirely new in your own career. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the road ahead, and we'll see you next time.